Hi guys, welcome to class. This is Friday's lecture. Today we're going to be covering health impairments, and it's a really good chapter, and it has a lot of really good information. I'm sorry I'm not there in person to present it to you. I'm just bummed about the weather right now. Can't be helped. So I'm going to go through our lecture today. When the lecture is over, I want you to go on to Moodle and I want you to post. If you post, then that is going to tell me that you listened to the lecture, and I'm going to take attendance that way. So everybody needs to post because it will impact your attendance grade. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and get going. Today, I was going to share the quiz with you. I'm not there, you're not there, so I will share the quiz on Monday with you. We want to talk about student health concerns, and that's our main topic today, and then I'm also going to revisit the syllabus with you. So this is today. You can see where the blue arrow is pointing. We are on health issues, and we're wrapping up Rosemary today. Again, we're pushing that compressed schedule to let us get through to midterm on Wednesday next week. Remember what I reminded you about on Wednesday, which was for chapter 5, which you can see right here. I don't really want you to dig into that entire chapter. I just want you to read on the Universal Design for Learning, and then the rest of my lecture will kind of fill in the gaps on differentiation and high leverage practices. Okay? If you have any questions about that, just email me. Hopefully everybody's gotten going on your midterm study guide. Remember my recommendations to you. Download it, fill it in with the information from slides, lectures, from the book, and we are planning on having a study night on Monday. There is actually another winter storm coming on Sunday night to Monday. I am just going to cross my fingers and hope that does not impact us. So we're just not even going to talk about that right now. Okay, and then please also remember the other big thing that's coming up is your service project paper. You have to turn in to me on Wednesday your evaluation and your timesheet, and you're going to have your paper submitted on Moodle. I will let you have until the end of Wednesday for your paper, so if you really need it, you can have until almost midnight, 11, I think it lets me go till 11:55 to submit your paper, but I have to have your evaluation and your timesheets, okay? Please be timely. That is also part of the grading for that particular project. All right, you have all been posting on the final 2 chapters of Rosemary. The thing that I really wanted, I'm reaching for the book right now, the thing that I really wanted you to get out of this is a chance to just think in culmination about what Rosemary's impact is. Not only her impact when she was alive, but the impact that remains. And that's what I found the most value from when getting to the end of this book for myself. A lot of you have posted about the things that the Kennedy family did after the tragic lobotomy left her even more disabled than she already was. And I think there's a really strong lesson in what happened to this family. They took a really, really tragic event and did move forward and did some important things that are continuing to impact the world today. Probably the best known thing that still remains from the Kennedy family is the Special Olympics organization, which is an international organization that promotes so many fantastic opportunities for individuals with disabilities to be athletes, to compete, to enjoy the thrill of winning, to enjoy the benefit of learning as a team, the health considerations that come from being a more active individual, and that is just one thing out of several that the family did embark on, because obviously they're a very influential family in the world. So that's Rosemary. We are done with her, so we're going to say goodbye to Rosemary, and we're going to continue on with what we're talking about today in this chapter. One of the things that I hope you are having some level of awareness with is that there are a lot of different needs when students come to school, and it's not just instructional needs. We have students who come with fairly complex health needs. I have had students that I've worked with who have been accompanied by a nurse full-time because they use a ventilator and they need to be suctioned regularly and positioned, and their level of care is pretty intense, and it can't just be done by someone who's trained. It has to be someone who's an actual medical professional. So the kind of needs that happen in schools, you can see it on the slide there. We have, whoops, no, let's go back. Try, there we go. We have, oh, stop that. There. I'm not going to touch that anymore. These are just a few examples. It could be tube feeding, it could be suctioning, it could be the ventilator, it could be students that need to be catheterized, and other needs like diabetes and seizure disorders. These are not rare at all. These are very common disabilities to see in public school settings. And so knowing that we have students who come into our setting who have either compromised health care or just simply have an existing healthcare need, as a school, you have to be responsive to that. First and foremost, these individuals may be eligible for special education because their health issue has impacted them educationally. And so we talk about the category in IDEA about other health impairment. This means that these students have a health issue that has impacted them in terms of their educational benefit they get out of their program. You'll often hear people talk about students with special healthcare needs as well. I liked the text making the point that just because the students have a healthcare condition does not mean they're not resilient, very healthy individuals, not necessarily fragile. They just need some special consideration. And that's the thing that I want you to carry away. On our next slide, my mouse is so touchy. Here we go. On our next slide, we're talking about what we have to do to meet student needs. You not only have to have preventative healthcare things in place as a school district, you also have specialized procedures. So those are the two things we're going to cover today. If I can get my mouse working. So when you talk about overall precautions, there's a couple of things that schools have to consider. That we do have individuals coming into our schools who do have compromised health, and we also have those individuals who have patterns of poor hygiene. They haven't learned it at home, or they are exposed to a different level of hygiene that's different than what we would have at school. It's not unusual to have families that have very persistent skin conditions, lice, impetigo, other situations like that, that for them are not a concern. They don't choose to, or perhaps don't have the wherewithal, the funds, the ability to address that problem for their household. And so these are students who are coming to school who are actively infected with either nits that turn into lice. We also have students that come to school and their clothing carries bed bugs because their home has an infestation and the family hasn't been able to stop it. Or you have kids that have, ringworm or other really highly communicable diseases like impetigo. So how do schools deal with that? You cannot stop kids at the door and say, I'm sorry, you can't come in. I mean, that's one of the big changes that's happened in the last few years is that the CDC has clarified things like lice are not such a health challenge that students shouldn't be at school. And I can tell you from personal experience, when we've had to have kids removed from school, or we've asked kids to go home, and now my head's itching because I'm talking about lice. If we've had to have kids removed from school, sometimes they don't come back for weeks because the family can't get rid of it and they don't want to continually be ashamed and embarrassed. And so that's just kind of a death spiral for these kids because they're missing all sorts of instruction in addition to having that embarrassment of having this, really common problem. Anybody can have lice. It's not a reflection on any level of cleanliness or ability. It's just super easy to get. So schools need to take precautions. Some of the first things that they do is ensuring that there's hand washing going on, disinfecting and waste disposal procedures. Should have procedures for universal allergy control, basic first aid, seizure management, process for administering medications. There are many, many kids who come to school that need medication administered during their school day. And it can't just be that somebody hands them a bottle and they take it. There's a lot of documentation and training that's involved. And then finally, every school should have a process of ensuring they have people trained in CPR and they know how to respond if someone goes into anaphylactic shock, which any of those things can happen at any time. You can have a kid out on the playground that gets stung by a bee and there's no record in their file that they are reactive to bee stings. But this might be the one that's the tipping point, and it might suddenly send that child into a significant reaction. The same true for seizures. You can have a child that's not had any record of seizures whatsoever, and suddenly they're dropping over and having a full seizure on you. So you have to, as a school district, have procedures in place, and you have to train people just for the anticipation of what might happen. These are some videos, and I'm not going to take the time on the video to show them to you. I probably would have in class, but basically they're orientating people to know that this is how we handle these particular health challenges in the school setting. And so it just gives you that background. These would be the kind of things that you would probably use to help your staff become familiar with process. Emergency plans. If you have been in a school, in a public school or a private school lately, probably you've seen signage for fires. If there's a tornado, maybe there's something in the classroom that deals with if there's lockdowns or a stranger on the premises and we need to be in a safety mode. A lot of times schools have those things hanging very prominently in lunchrooms, in staff break rooms, and in classrooms. Your plans have to be not only present, but communicated and trained on. And so that's the part that can be so challenging because there's turnover. Teachers come and go. The second grade teacher may have had a process for her classroom of exactly what they do when there's a fire alarm. And the next year it's a new teacher. That teacher needs to be trained exactly what we do with fire alarms. That's probably practice. We have drills for all of those things. CPR training is something that is obviously nothing anybody wants to ever have to use, but when you need it, you need it. In addition to CPR training, many schools now have the resuscitation devices, the defibrillators, and they've saved lives. They've saved kids' lives, they've saved athletes' lives, they've saved the lives of adults that are in the building as visitors, as coaches. And so those are proving to be really, really critical tools as well. So often, if you get into a public building, look around, you're going to see where one is marked, where a defibrillation machine is marked so people can get to it. The good thing about a lot of those machines is they're designed because you never know when you're going to be using it and who might be using it. It's designed to actually walk you through the process. It kind of talks to you as you're doing it. The same is true for anaphylactic shock. If you've ever seen an electronic EpiPen, those will also walk you through the process of administering an EpiPen, which is an injection that is epinephrine that you give and actually give it in the thigh to break up the reaction that the body is having to the toxins. So all of those things are really under the responsibility of the administrators and then the teachers. So, you know, they make the plans, train on the plans, and then teachers need to be aware and carry them out. But it's not just teachers, it's also janitors, it's bus drivers, it's lunchroom staff, it's library aides, it's people out on the playground. Everybody needs to have that information. Okay, so that's kind of a universal approach to healthcare in schools. Then you have students that do have those specialized situations that I talked about. Remember I said we have kids that come to school that are tube fed. We have kids that use ventilators, need suctioning, kids with diabetes, kids with active seizure disorders, kids with really critical allergies that are highly reactive if they should come in contact with a substance that they are allergic to. And so these are the kind of students that need to have an individualized healthcare plan. You know, we've talked about the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan. This would be a different plan, probably designed and developed by a team, just like an IEP. And who are the people that probably should be on that team? Well, obviously the parents need to be on that team, probably your school nurse, potentially the classroom teacher, anybody that interacts with the child on a regular basis, and then probably an administrator. So looking a lot like a special education team. And as you see on the slide here, you can see the bullets that I've given. These are the things that are recommended to be in an individualized healthcare plan. The student's health history, what are their healthcare needs, what's their current status, because just because someone's had perhaps an active seizure disorder in the past, perhaps today they're under, those seizures are maybe more under control. So that would be something useful to have in the plan. Doesn't mean you couldn't have another seizure, but right now the record is maybe they are not having them currently. Or it could be the inverse. You could be having someone who's perhaps diabetic and they're having a lot of challenges with insulin spikes because they're going through some growth spurts. Lists of medications used at home and at school, that's very important. If someone should ever become unable to share that information, or they're just too young to have that ability to share it, you need to know it, because you're going to be communicating that. If there is suddenly a crisis and you're working with an EMT, they're going to want to know what meds that individual is on. Any dietary or nutritional needs. Sometimes children who have an ongoing chronic health condition can be taking certain supplements, nutrients, they need to avoid certain things or have certain things. All of those are part of a plan. If the student needs specialized transportation, this would be a place where you could delineate that. For example, if they are such a brittle diabetic that you don't want them way in the back of the bus if they start to have a reaction and need intervention. So maybe their specialized transportation is that they sit closer to the front of the bus. Maybe some students need specialized busing equipment. Maybe they are a wheelchair user and so they need to be riding in a wheelchair accessible bus. Maybe they need to be sure that they're always supervised, so someone needs to be riding with them. Any of those things could be specialized transportation. Special equipment needs could be maybe the student needs to have I'm trying to think of the name of it, a tool to check your blood sugars, and so that has to be at school. So someone, a glucometer, sorry. Maybe they need a special chair. Remember we talked when we were together on Wednesday, I talked about some different adaptive equipment like Rifton chairs that are positioning equipment. Maybe you need the student to be sitting in a chair like that while they're eating. Maybe they need to be positioned differently throughout their day to prevent sores. That you get pressure sores if you stay in one position for too long. And if an individual isn't able to move independently, they're going to need the support of someone to make sure that they are being repositioned so they don't end up with those sores. And then finally, child-specific plans. You can't just universally address every healthcare situation the same. How one person presents with a health issue may be different than another, even though they both are perhaps diabetic. So that would be the very specific things that the child has in their plan. All right. I don't know why that's moving. All right. So now we're still in the wrong place. Well, okay. Let's go here. All right, so what I've got for you now is I do have a couple of videos that I'm going to show you, and they are examples of seizures. The one little girl you're going to see over here has really subtle seizures, and then this little person over here has, gosh darn it, I keep doing that, has really obvious seizures. And then this video down here is a school official talking through a very tragic situation and reminding people of the steps to take with anaphylaxis. And we probably won't watch all of this, but I want you to just kind of get the flavor of it. So we'll watch a little bit of each of these videos. The recording probably will not capture as much of the sound, so you might have to turn up the volume on your computer when you're watching these different videos. No, let's see. Okay, I just wanted to, I'm going to do something here.
You okay? Careful.
Sorry guys, I just want to be able to make it larger so you can see it. And I can't go to full screen because then it won't record. So, sorry. I apologize. This is a little bit wonky while we're doing this. So just going to go here. I'm going to get rid of me. No, that's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. All right, let me try this again. See if I can get this little lady showing here.
You okay? Careful. You chewing? Sally? Sally? Sally?
Okay, so in that video, it's really subtle. Could not really even notice it if it hadn't been for the family giving us those cues. I'm going to make this one small, and I'm going to show you this next one. I think I am, anyway. Okay, let's see if I can make this one big. Sorry, this is not super great here. That one over there. And okay, so this is going to be a more significant seizure now.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bella.
All right, baby.
Right in the heart, dude.
I know. All right. Done? Poor heart's going so fast.
How do I need to do that?
To the doctor.
Okay, so that one, it's a little tough to watch if you have not seen a seizure like that before. It can be very shocking as well, because you're just not expecting it, and here's this person that is suddenly really in distress. Okay, so here's our last one that I wanted to show you. And we'll just watch that for a little bit, okay?
Hello everyone, and it's Jonathan Cunningham from Storm School Safety here. Sadly, over the weekend we had the tragic news of yet another, this has now been the third child in approximately 6 weeks to have lost their life at school. It was a 9-year-old boy from Birmingham, and this time it wasn't choking as previous, but actually it was what appears to be anaphylactic shock brought on by eating fish over lunchtime. In the next few minutes, I'm just going to cover for you the sort of six areas that I suggest you make sure that your school is abiding by, or indeed your staff. The first thing is, first and foremost, to just understand that that school is going through immense anguish now. Can you imagine what the head teachers and teachers are going through? You've got issues as well in terms of HR, with the staff in terms of making sure that you've got adequate support in place, and there's also counselling support going to be required for those children. How many children actually saw the attendance resuscitation? So, and just in terms of the facts of the case, it was a Birmingham-based child, aged 9, 12:30 he went in for lunch, and at 2 o'clock the ambulance was called. So that's 90 minutes before it was so serious that they had to call an ambulance. So what happened in those 90 minutes? Well, there's some things here, and we don't know what the full details are, but some things, just reassure yourself that you are not going to be held culpable for this. And if I can just a quote from some of the social media at the moment, you know, if the school had a policy.
Okay, so you can see there's a school that's going in reaction mode to having this really tragic thing happen. And he goes on and he reads some of the information, and then he walks everybody kind of through, and you can see this little chart over here of what to do. Obviously, this is a pretty informal approach. You would want to have something more formal, in my opinion, in any school. Obviously, knowing your children, knowing what they might have. This says, I believe, school catering, so that's, talking to them about what people are allergic to, location of where the EpiPens are, having parents sign probably for permission to use them, knowing what the symptoms are, and training. Obviously this is just one school's reaction and response to a really tragic event, but every school should have a plan in place. And actually, there's been in South Dakota last year, there was actually, I think it was like 2 legislative sessions ago, they changed a law and allowed schools to, and required schools to stock EpiPens on campus. And so now schools have EpiPens because, quite honestly, you do not know exactly when students will have an allergic reaction. So knowing the signs of it, knowing the students that are already prone to it, having the training, knowing how to administer an EpiPen are all critical, because nobody wants to be in a situation where they have a child having a significant health issue like that. Okay, so other things that schools have to address, and I've kind of referred to these a little bit, is that they need plans and training to address a lot of health issues. You have students that come to school that have shunts. You may not even know it because it was implanted if this child was born with a health condition, hydrocephalic, or if they had spina bifida. Sometimes also shunts will be in place. And basically the shunt is a tube that works to drain fluids from the brain, and it's implanted, and it can get blocked, it can come dislodged, there's other things that can go wrong with a shunt. So you need to obviously know that your student has a shunt and know what to watch for. Students with feeding tubes, not unusual. I had a student that was in our school district a number of years ago. He came and his only source of nutrition was through his feeding tube, or it's called a G-tube sometimes. It is one of the things that can be delegated and trained to non-healthcare providers. So your teachers and teachers' assistants may learn how to provide nutrition with a feeding tube. And most of the time it's fairly straightforward. It's just a tube that's implanted, right, and it goes straight into the stomach. And there's a little line that you open up, and then you have nutrition that you pour in that's liquid. But that's not to say it's easy or comfortable for everybody to do, but it's not uncommon. You will have students that will come to school that will be using a ventilator or tracheostomy. That is also something that can be more complicated. Those are the kind of students that will probably need the support of a trained nurse. And while they may not need a nurse right next to them, they will need to have immediate access to the nurse if there should be something going wrong with their ventilator or if they need suctioning. So those are the kind of things that will go into an individualized healthcare plan. Students that use catheters, a lot of students, especially students who may be born with spina bifida or have some other injury, might be using clean intermittent catheterization, which for younger children you might help with. For older children, they may be learning how to do it themselves, and so you might be supervising. And then the last one is, that stands for, DNR order stands for do not resuscitate. These are probably some of the most challenging health situations that a school could ever find themselves in, which is when a family has an order on a child who has a terminal illness of some type, and they have said we do not want them resuscitated if they should go into cardiac arrest or have some other challenge. Most schools will tell families that they will not honor a DNR because schools are educational settings, they're not medical settings. And so I think kind of standard response when families present a DNR is that we will call an ambulance when your child presents with this healthcare issue, and we will get them to the care of a medical facility who can respond to your DNR. But we will provide care on site. And that would be, in my opinion, the right way to go about handling such a sensitive issue. Classrooms are not a place where students expect to have their peer next to them maybe starting to have an arrest, and then everybody just lets it happen. That's just not what happens in a classroom setting. But to be honest, it's not as simple as that even. You really do need to have a plan because healthcare may not arrive in time if a child is that fragile. And so I know in my own school we had a student that was dealing with an expected end-of-life issue, and while there wasn't a DNR order in place necessarily, we were aware that the student could pass away at any time. And so we developed her individualized healthcare plan that if her nurse who was with her identified that we were in a sort of a health crisis, we had some basic statements that we would use to inform the teacher that she needed to move the students to another classroom. And so the plan was that other students would go to another classroom, and then another person would be calling 911, and somebody else would be calling the parent, and all these things were designed to happen kind of simultaneously for the care of the student and all the other students in the classroom. As it turned out, we ended up not ever having to implement that plan, but we did have that plan in place for a number of years until the student did finally decline and passed away outside the school setting. So, talking a little bit about the classroom, we've talked about inclusion and how important it is to have individuals with disabilities in the classroom. Part of having these plans is to ensure that students aren't removed from the classroom more than they need to be, and they aren't isolated when they are in the classroom to the highest extent that we can prevent. You want to ensure that everything is in place that makes it possible for them to be in class. We can't say to them, well, you know, they're so fragile, we just can't have them in the classroom. No, we need to make plans to make that happen for the student. There's training that needs to happen for the entire school if this is a complex healthcare situation that they need to be aware of, so they have understanding and awareness and empathy. And then also that specialized training that I talked about that relates to the needs of that particular child. A lot of times schools are going to need to accommodate their health needs. There will be more absences. So your usual, you can be gone 10 days in a total school year, is probably not going to be applicable for a student with a significant healthcare issue. Plus, when they're away from the classroom, I had a student that needed breathing treatments frequently, and so we built a schedule for her that gave her 2 class periods on and then a class period off, and then we repeated that throughout her high school day so that she could take that break to rest and recover, get the treatment she needed, and then she went back to class. So those are the kind of things that you do to accommodate for families and students. Another aspect of talking about healthcare issues and individuals with disabilities is the topic of medical discrimination. And I would bet, if we were together in class, most of you probably have not had this on your radar, but this is a genuine issue. There's a long history of medical discrimination against individuals who have severe disabilities. I've cited a couple for you. They're right from your text. Baby Doe was born with Down syndrome and was denied corrective surgery and hydration and nutrition simply because of being born with Down syndrome. And then another student was denied life-saving surgery on her spine because the caregivers, the medical professionals, believed she had an intellectual disability and a poor quality of life. So they were making the decision basically to let her die because she had a disability. And so, fortunately for us, we have federal law that prohibits that kind of thing. But if you notice, the federal law predates those 2 court cases. And those are just 2 examples. There's more examples in your text. But Section 504 prohibits discrimination. And what you want to keep in mind is that there is a complex world that involves insurance and medical costs and medical needs. And so there's constantly this tension between all of these areas of what's medically needed versus what's just a wish, and how do we pay for this, and who's responsible? Well, a lot of the current definitions of medical necessity require that you show that they need this to improve their health, which is not the same as saying we're going to give them this intervention, this surgery, this service to maintain their capacity. So often, insurance companies are denying some of these services. All right. Other things that can assist in supporting individuals with healthcare needs is providing goals within a plan, an educational plan, an IEP, that help increase their self-care and their level of independence. If they're an individual who perhaps is currently catheterized you may have a goal for them that teaches them how to recognize when it's time for them to go and catheterize, and then eventually learning all the steps to be able to do it independently. Obviously, that's an important skill for that individual to be more independent as they grow. So at any time, the IEP team may be writing goals that help with their own advocacy for themselves. Okay, so wrapping up, what I want you to take away from this is to be able to know what is an individualized healthcare plan, what's the purpose of an emergency plan, and when I talk about an emergency plan, I mean for comprehensive situations in schools and also for individualized situations. Schools need to have overall preparation, but you also have to have individualized emergency plan preparation. That's another thing I didn't talk about, but if I could just backtrack a bit, students with, as I think I mentioned the other day, students with motor impairments and other healthcare needs not only need to have a plan if they have a health crisis, but if there's an emergency, just in general, tornado, fire, lockdown, these things have to be identified and accommodated for so that they are not denied the same supports in case of an emergency. So you have emergencies that are happening to the whole school, but then you have individual student emergencies. I hope that makes some sense. But I do want you to be understanding of what is an individualized healthcare plan. And if you remember, I'm going to jump back to this slide right here. These are the things that belong in an individualized healthcare plan. Okay? All right. Just about done here. Just some last reminders. I want you to remember to post on Moodle for this lecture. I will have a prompt for you, and you need to answer that prompt. And I want you to be sure that you get that done by Sunday night. I'm not going to ask you to go and read a bunch of other posts by your peers. I just want you to post, and that's going to serve as your attendance. Again, service learning projects. I'm still getting emails. People are wrapping them up. That's awesome. Everybody except Friendship Ministries, you got to be ready on Wednesday next week. Have your evaluation and your timesheet done, and turn in your paper on Moodle. Okay, then we got our study guide, and of course midterms coming up. And then we're gonna switch gears and go to our second half of the class. Okay? All right, that's all I have for you. Remember, go to the forum, post, and I will see you, God willing, on Monday. All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.